Well, we're here one day shy of the 108th anniversary of the Battle of Tsushima on the deck of the Japanese Battleship Mikasa. It's the only existing pre-Dreadnought battleship in the world today. It was built, laid down in 1900 in barrel and furnace, built by Vickers, weighs 15,140 tons. It was launched in 1902 and served as a flagship for Admiral Togo in all of the major naval engagements of the Russo-Japanese War. You can see behind me its main armament, which consisted of 4 12-inch guns mounted in 2 turrets, fore and aft. Up on the top there, exposed above the railing, is where Admiral Togo conned his ship and his fleet during the Battle of Tsushima, which was a battle of annihilation against the Russian Baltic Fleet, which had traveled almost 1 year to revenge the Battle of Port Arthur. This engagement marked the end of the Russo-Japanese War.
So, the Russo-Japanese War, why did it start?
Well, it was just 2 powers, imperial powers, battling with each other. The Japanese were a rising power. Russia was expanding into Manchuria. It was really a battle over Korea. They were trying to decide who was going to rule Korea. So the Mikasa behind me was based on the British Majestic class battleships, which were easily the best and most balanced design of battleships in the 1890s. It was an improved version of the Majestic's class, as instead of having nickel steel Harvey armor, it was equipped with Krupp armor. It was the only of the Japanese battleships to be equipped with Krupp armor at the time of the Russo-Japanese War, and subsequently it became the flagship of the combined fleet. The Russian battleships, 8 of their 12 battleships at the Battle of Tsushima, did have Krupp armor. However, it didn't do them much good in that battle.
All right, so what do we got here?
This is a 6-inch 40 caliber gun. It's a quick firing 6-inch gun. It can fire 5 to 7 rounds a minute. It's the secondary armament of the Mikasa. And it fires either high explosive, armor piercing, or general purpose shells. Shell weight is 45 kilograms with separate powder charge.
Wow. So,
like being in a bell. Can you imagine when shells are bouncing off this?
Wow. So just somebody walking up there making all that noise, and
So imagine when something clangs against the side of this armored casemate here, and what it would have been like.
And I guess the sound of the gun going off as well.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure they wore cotton in their ears. And this would be for the elevation. This would be the swivel. Now, this gun's effective out to about 10,000 yards. And they used the 6-inch, they tried to use the 6-inch for ranging shots because of its higher firing rate, because they only have 4 12-inch guns, and their firing rate is about 1 shot a minute for each gun. So as you're firing 5 to 7 rounds a minute, it's easier for ranging. But the problem is, in a battle, you can't distinguish between the splashes of a 6-inch gun and a 12-inch because they both kick up a big splash when they hit. So they found that technique was not so effective. The big advantage that the Japanese had over the Russians was they had a much higher firing rate on their guns than the Russians. So like a battleship like the Mikasa could put out a volume of fire equal to about 1.5 times what the Borodino could put out. Part of that is because of the types of weapons they had, but it was also due to the crew training. They had a much higher level of training than the Russian conscripts.
ここ4番班では全部の後部にある30センチの地方や電信室 また最小艦隊に倣って本郷平八郎司令長官が全盲艦隊を指揮したところや艦長海津
Should do SOS.
No, he's good. That's on 40 degrees.
Okay, so what are we looking at right here?
These are Armstrong Whitworth 12-inch 40 caliber naval guns. They were manufactured in Britain. This was a standard armament for ships of that era up until just before the First World War. And it could throw, I think it's a 485 kilogram projectile out to really 15 kilometers, but not very accurate. The really accurate gunfire wasn't possible until you got under 6 kilometers. Only big guns. They didn't have any intermediate guns. Just big guns and small guns for defending against torpedo boats. This is showing the operation of the gun turret. This is your powder magazine, and this is your shell magazine. And you see the shells are put onto a hoist. So they had to use this to lift each shell, and then it's like a little elevator hoist up to here, and then it's transferred up and then loaded, rammed into the barrel. And then the powder would also come up. This is the powder lift. So these are the powder charges. They're put behind the shell because it's in two pieces because it's so heavy.
And we have, what do we have over here?
Well, that's kind of a fanciful diagram. I think what they're trying to illustrate here is fire control, because this is an unrealistic elevation. They never elevated those guns that high. It wouldn't be any reason, and it was not feasible. But what they're showing is how the observer here is, transmitting information down, and then this officer is maybe giving instructions to the fire control team.
This is a Frankfurt 6-inch gun. In this Frankfurt, about 10 gunnery ratings were assigned, headed by a gun captain. Here, only the gun captain and 4 other members are displayed. The gun captain was in charge of fire control, and the gun layer was in charge of aiming at the target. One loading crew was in charge of operating the breech opening here to load the shell, while the other was preparing the next shell. Now you will hear an example of the sequence for firing a 6-inch gun in battle. Fire action, both sides. Fire action, both sides. Load. Load. Load set. Mark the target. Left 20 degree. Leading ship.
Mark the target. Left 20 degree. Leading ship. Set.
Range 6400.
Range 6400. Set.
Correct 2 points to the left.
Correct. 2 points to the left. Set.
Correct 3 points high.
Correct. 3 points high. Set.
Fire.
Fire.
Load.
Load. Load set.
Fire.
Fire.
This is the Admiral Saloon, defended by a 45 millimeter French Hotchkiss quick fire. It's capable of 30 rounds a minute. I think this is, I believe this is one of the smallest guns that's mounted on the ship.
It's got like a little trigger, just like a gun. Sad. This would be fun to fire if you could find somewhere that would let you. Right now, I'd like to shoot this little gathering over here and keep singing horrible music. Oh, it's a crew. It's a tourist boat.
This is a quick firing 12-pounder, also known as a 3-inch or 76mm gun. It has a firing rate of 15 rounds per minute. It would be used against fast craft like torpedo boats or destroyers. This particular type of weapon served through the First World War. It was used as an anti-submarine weapon, and if my memory is correct, some British submarines also mounted a version of this as a deck gun all the way up through the Second World War. It fired a 5.7 kilogram high explosive shell. I believe it also had an armor-piercing shell, and fairly easy to manipulate. Control the elevation with this wheel, and you can swivel it quite easily. So it would be very easy to keep on target. You have a notch and V sight up here, just like a rifle, with an adjustment for windage and for elevation. It's effective out, well, it can shoot out to about 9 kilometers, but I would say it's probably not very effective at that range because I don't think you could elevate it high enough to get the shot that far. They probably used this at around under 4 kilometers, I would say, if that, during the war. And you can see the breech mechanism here. It's been locked, so you can't open the breech anymore. But yeah, it's quite an interesting little gun. This would be the light armament. As we mentioned earlier, the 12-inch guns, 4 of them in 2 turrets, were the main armament of the Mikasa, and the secondary armament were the 6-inch guns, mainly mounted in caissons below this deck. And then you had these 3-inch guns, and then there's a few 45mm Hotchkiss quick fires that are war mounted on the deck above this, and also back in the saloon, the Admiral Saloon. We saw 2 examples of that. Their firing rate is about once every 2 seconds, 30 rounds a minute, whereas these, again, are 15 rounds a minute.
So the Mikasa is what they call like a pre-Dreadnought Battleship.
That's right.
Now, for those who don't know, what is a Dreadnought?
Well, the Dreadnought was named after the HMS Dreadnought, which was commissioned 1 year after the Battle of Tsushima. And there was a problem in naval warfare, was always what size cannons to install and how to hit the target. And Fisher, who was in that British Admiralty, was an advocate of an all big gun ship. And the Battle of Tsushima, he used some of that to reinforce his conclusion. So the Dreadnought, instead of having 4 12-inch guns like the Mikasa, I believe it had 12 12-inch guns and no secondary armament at all. There were no 6-inch batteries at all like you find on the Mikasa. They had some smaller weapons to fend off torpedo boats and things like that, but it was an all big gun ship.
I see, yeah.
So after that, all battleships had 8 big guns or more. Some of them have as many as 12, like the Dreadnought. The USS Texas is a good example of a post-Dreadnought battleship, and it served in World War I and World War II. And I think it's in Texas. I can't remember where it's preserved. It's a museum ship also that would be worthwhile seeing.
So this crenulated surface that you see here, it's all over the ceiling of the officer's wardroom. If you grew up in the 70s, you probably saw something like this on the roof of a lot of the suburban homes. It was kind of fashionable, but actually, it came off in the hand. Actually, this has a functional purpose. It's designed to break up the shock wave of a high explosive hit. Because this is the officer's wardroom, this is the only room that's equipped with this. Because imagine if they're all in here having mess, and there's an explosion on the ship, for whatever reason, a magazine explosion, a shell hit, it would knock out or incapacitate all your officers. So it's hoped that this would break up the shock wave and reduce the concussive effect on the occupants of the room. So it's a kind of interesting feature, I think, that a friend of mine who was formerly in the Royal Navy told me about.
And then it became style for trailer ceilings.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm not sure what kind of explosions they were expecting there. It doesn't help out for tornadoes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But again, you can see the crenulated surface on the ceiling to reduce concussion from an explosion. Got a fireplace. I wonder if that was a functional fireplace. Must have been. I don't think they made decorative fireplaces back then. And you can see there's a skylight.
I think this is a life-size portrait of
Admiral Togo.
Yeah.
Togo Heihachiro. Here's the Citadel. You can actually go inside the
That's what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what is this right here?
Well, this would be the battle pilot house. When they're slugging it out with the enemy, the ship could be helmed from in here behind 10 inches of Krupp steel armor. Of course, you can see the visibility is relatively limited. And during the battle, I know that Togo didn't take refuge here. He was up on top of the pilot house. Of course, they had it sandbagged, but still, to con the ship, he did it from the top of the pilot house because there's far better situational awareness there. From where I'm standing right here, this plaque marks the spot where Admiral Togo conned the Mikasa during battle. At the Battle of Tsushima, he would have been standing here. He called out his famous Togo turn through this repeater pipe here down to the pilot house. Of course, all of these things had bedrolls around them to protect against splinters, but still you can see it's a very exposed position, but it would have given him a very high situational awareness of what was going on compared to down in the armored pilot house. Right there to your side, you can see a Barrow and Stroud rangefinder. This is how they got the range of the ship that they were firing on. It's a coincidence rangefinder. These two telescopes put an image through this eyepiece, a double image. You adjust it until the images meet, and then you can read off the range. It was effective out to about 6,000 meters. It was the latest technology at that time and gave the Japanese a distinct advantage over the Russians,
who were using a range-finding system based on known distances that took much longer to tabulate. Of course, even after the range is found, they still had to spot the fall of shot for adjustments.
Now, so yeah, the Russo-Japanese War started in 1904,
That's right.
and this battle that the Mikasa was in basically ended the war
Yes.
in May 27th, right?
May 27th.
1905.
That's right, May 27th, 1905. The Baltic Fleet had virtually sailed, well, not really around the world, but they had to sail all the way from the Baltic around Africa, the Cape of Horn, because the British wouldn't allow them to pass through the Suez Canal. It took them, I think it was close to a year, 9 months.
Yeah, so about like it's like at least more than 6 months, I believe, when I looked at the. But a long time to sail.
Yeah, and a long time for the Japanese to know they were coming.
Yeah.
So they had set up scouts because they expected them to enter the Straits of Tsushima, and one of their auxiliary cruisers sighted them at 3:30 a.m. on the morning of May 27th, 1905, and sent a wireless message. So I think that's kind of interesting because I think this was one of the first times that radios were used in a conflict. They signaled to Admiral Togo that the Russians were coming, and so he could dump his excess coal to reduce the fire hazards on his battleships.
And that's an important factor there.
Yeah, especially when you consider one of the problems the Russians had is there weren't any coaling stations nearby, so they had to stock up on coal. So the corridors of the Russian ships, the extra spaces in the ships, were all filled with bags of coal, which was a very severe fire hazard, and proved to be part of their undoing in the battle.
So do you remember, offhand, like what the casualty in terms of ships were?
Well, almost all of the Baltic Fleet was captured. I think a few ships got away. Some of them went to the Philippines, and they were interred there because the Philippines at that time was a U.S. Commonwealth. And the United States being neutral, when they entered a neutral port, they had to be interred for the duration of the hostilities. So until the Treaty of Portsmouth was concluded by Theodore Roosevelt, I believe the Russian ships were interred in the Philippines. But I think it was only two, maybe the Aurora, which interestingly you can still see the cruiser Aurora. I believe it's in Leningrad. And that's the only other ship from that period, I guess, that's still around.
So at the end of the tour of the Mikasa, we've gotten some Admirali?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Admirali beer, which is basically it's a beer about Togo.
Yeah, Heihachiro Togo. Behind us, the statue.
Oh, not bad. Kind of a Pilsner kind of taste. What do you think?
Yeah, it's good for summer. Cheers.
Kampai. Here's to Togo. Yeah. Oh, so we got a second beer as well. I spilled some of mine, but it's the Memorial Ship Mikasa Z Flag beer.
You know what the Z flag is?
No.
That Z flag refers to the message, the Nelson-like message that Admiral Togo sent just before the Battle of Tsushima began. And I'll try to quote him. I believe it was, "The fate of the empire rests on this battle. Each man shall do his utmost," I believe is a translation of that signal. So this flag represented that signal to his ships.
Interesting. And this is a dark beer.
Yes, it is.
Quite tasty as well. Alright. So if you ever come down to Yokosuka, you should definitely come and check out the Mikasa. It's the pretty much only type of ship of its
Oh,
type.
it is the only one.
Yeah.
It's the only pre-dreadnought battleship in existence in the world.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see a ship from a battleship, an steel battleship from over 100 years ago. Yeah. And try some of the local brew. Quite good.